So thanks a lot, Jennifer. And then I'm going to introduce the next speaker, who is Jennifer King. She is one of our own. She's here at Cal. She's a PhD candidate in information science at iSchool, the School of Information here at UC Berkeley. And in her work, she uses human-computer interaction methods to examine the privacy gap between people's expectations and how technological systems function. And before returning to academia, she worked in security and product management for several internet companies, most recently Yahoo. Please join me welcoming Jennifer King. And Jennifer's Twitter handle is KingJen. You can find it in the program too.
Hi, everybody. I'm actually standing in for Jennifer Urban today because you can't do a surveillance talk at Berkeley without having at least two Jennifers involved. And we all have worked for the Samuelson Law and Technology Clinic here at the law school, so it's a Jennifer trifecta when it comes to surveillance here at Berkeley. I was also invited here today, though, because while I study privacy specifically, I also worked back in 2008 for Citrus on a evaluation report of the city of San Francisco's surveillance cameras. That's something I did with my advisor, Professor Deirdre Mulligan, as well as Professor Steve, and I can't believe his last name just disappeared from my head. Steve at GSPP. His name will come back to me in a second, and I'll give him proper credit. But so I've actually done an evaluation of a surveillance system. It being San Francisco, it's not maybe New York, but and I'm happy to talk about that if anybody has questions about it during the panel period. Okay, so for many of us, our first awareness of visual surveillance came with the introduction of Google Street View. And can any of you actually remember the first time you saw one of these cars? I mean, it's been maybe, 6-ish years, I think, since they first hit the streets. But now you can think about how commonplace it is to see one of these now, especially here in the Bay Area. I see not only Google, but a car like this driving the streets. I'd say like every 2 or 3 months one goes by, and now it just, you think about it. But immediately after the release of Street View, people began finding images that challenged this notion of what it meant to be in public. And this is kind of a Hall of Fame compilation of some of the first images that people found in Street View that illustrated the complexity of what it means to be photographed in public without one's knowledge, and then having that image available for the whole world to look at. And recall that in the US, when Street View first launched, they did so without blurring faces or license plates or any other markers. So it took a great deal of kind of public feedback, especially in Europe, where I believe it actually took litigation, before we actually had that layer of privacy protection added to Street View, but it was absolutely retrospective. So Street View and maps are examples of technology that, while they have many positive uses, they really required introducing a level of restraint in order still to respect individual privacy. And our notions of public privacy and anonymity are still anchored to a past where it was difficult and occasionally impossible for anyone to pinpoint your location or your identity without someone actually seeing you somewhere. Today, while our mobile phones can reveal where we've been, it's still possible in a city where you don't know anybody. If you turn off your phone, you're probably still anonymous. Someone probably can't identify you just walking down the street. But we are nearing the point where that may actually change. So even today, if our likenesses are captured by a multitude of surveillance cameras, these images are generally stored for a short amount of time, we hope, and then erased and often not even viewed by human eyes. This won't be the case if surveillance feeds are actually networked and facial recognition technology is deployed on them. While facial recognition systems today are still fairly primitive, with every passing year they have the potential to become more and more robust. So a year ago, we had the bombings at the Boston Marathon, and I think that was a point where some of the debate on public surveillance shifted. The search to identify the culprits really inspired, I think, a lot of people to question the value of whether public anonymity was something we should keep or discard. But that's despite the fact, I think, that it's questionable whether if you had massive public video surveillance in Boston, if they would have necessarily caught these guys before the bombing. And in fact, it took 3 days for them to be identified, primarily through private surveillance footage, as well as people's own images that they submitted to the FBI. So while certainly it wasn't instantaneous, it was still a fairly short amount of time before these guys were identified. We can debate the efficacy of video surveillance today and whether or not it will reduce crime. Like I said, that's an area I've explicitly researched and something that I'm happy to talk about if anybody wants to during the panel. But one of the questions I want to raise is whether we should continue to allow for some degree of public anonymity and place restraint on how we allow public surveillance by both public and private entities. So just yesterday, the city of Oakland, this is a picture taken about, I think, 48 hours ago in front of Oakland City Hall. They moved to reduce the scope of what they were proposing as a domain awareness center, and that was in response to a great deal of resident protests. And what's interesting, I think, about this is that despite Oakland's very persistent crime problem, this system was not likely to help it. And it appears the focus of the system was actually on resource deployment, so getting cops into places where they wanted cops to be, primarily downtown Oakland in response to the Occupy protests that have been ongoing there. So it was really that focus rather than a focus on fighting crime, at least this is according to the East Bay Express that had a really interesting article about it recently. But advocates were also concerned about the lack of rules around privacy and data retention that had been in the initial proposal, as well as its scope. It really sought to incorporate a whole host of technologies, and I think that had a lot of people concerned that it was kind of an open-ended thing rather than being discrete. But while the NSA revelations show that we have lots to be concerned about with government surveillance, we really shouldn't overlook these discussions with the new ways that private players are utilizing surveillance technologies. So I'm going to go through just a couple before I finish. So first, this is an area that's getting a great deal of hype, and I actually think it's probably overhyped, and it's basically called indoor surveillance. This is where stores can use your smartphone's Wi-Fi signal or its UID to actually identify your device. And then in some cases, they're also proposing using facial recognition systems on internal video feeds to identify you as soon as you enter the store. That's primarily to target you for advertising, and some stores are spinning it as a way to provide you excellent customer service. I don't know if you want that level of excellent customer service, but that's what they're hoping to do. Another one that Jen also mentioned is license plate recognition. This is a story that actually just ran yesterday in the Boston Globe about how auto repossessors in Massachusetts are using license plate scanners not only to locate vehicles that they can then repossess and earn a bonus for, but they're also taking feeds of all the license plates they encounter in their daily drives and sending them back to a central database in Texas. And that vendor is then in turn using that data and reselling it to other vendors. I think primarily insurance companies has been one of their first customers. And this is just, anything they see as they drive around, they're just sucking in and storing. And then finally, drones, one of our favorite topics at the School of Information. We love talking about drones. Drones are interesting. I think their growing availability and the relative cheapness for anybody to buy a drone may really force kind of a reckoning day with people's perceptions of visual surveillance, because drones have this very unique ability to evade personal space unlike anything else, and I think that's really resonated with people. Suddenly the idea that someone can send a camera into my backyard and I may not have any recourse or anything I can do about it besides maybe trying to shoot it down. And I think that's really kind of made people begin to question a little bit what it means to be photographed or recorded in public, or in this case, someone's backyard. And so as a researcher, what I look at as I review all these things, the questions I ask myself are, where can we actually add friction back into these systems to keep them from upending our social norms in a way that's more negative than positive? How much burden are we going to place on individuals to navigate these surveilled spaces and protect themselves? I think of it kind of as being a celebrity without the benefits of being a celebrity. So, if Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt go out in public, they pretty much disguise themselves in hats and whatever else so they don't look obvious. I mean, is that the world we're going to have to go into? I don't want to do that without, the side benefits of being Angelina Jolie. That'd be much more fun. And then finally, how much leeway are we going to continue to give private companies to aggregate and resell our images in this case without our knowledge or even our explicit consent? I think that's becoming a real pressing issue. And that's all I have for today, and I look forward to talking more on the panel. Thanks very much.
Thank you.